I always thought the day I died would be quiet, but instead, it smelled like expensive cologne, gunpowder, and the terrifying realization that the most ruthless mafia boss in the city had just bought me. Welcome back to the channel. If you love thrilling boy love stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below to let me know you're here. It really helps support the channel and brings you more of the stories you crave. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into today's story. Part 1. Sold to the Underworld. The blindfold over my eyes was rough, scratching against my skin every time the black SUV hit a pothole. My wrists were bound tightly behind my back with heavy-duty zip ties, the plastic biting into my flesh so deeply my fingers had gone completely numb an hour ago. I was 23 years old, and my life was officially over. I didn't need to see the men sitting on either side of me to know they were armed to the teeth. I could hear the faint, metallic shift of their weapons every time the vehicle took a sharp turn. I could hear their slow, steady breathing. Professionals. You don't send street thugs to collect a debt of $2 million. You send the reapers. My older brother, Marcus, had always been a gambler. He gambled with money he didn't have, with people he shouldn't cross, and finally, he gambled with my life. He had forged my signature on the collateral documents. By the time I found out, Marcus had already skipped the country, leaving me in our crumbling apartment with an empty bank account and a knock on the door that shattered the hinges. The SUV finally ground to a halt. The engine cut off, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the cabin. The doors slid open, letting in the cool, crisp night air. Rough hands grabbed my shoulders, hauling me out of the seat. My knees buckled slightly as my feet hit solid concrete, but they didn't let me fall. They dragged me forward, my boots echoing against what sounded like an underground parking garage. We walked for what felt like miles, entering a building, stepping into an elevator that went up for a dizzyingly long time. The air shifted. The damp smell of concrete was replaced by the faint, intimidating scent of lemon polish, rich mahogany, and subtle, overwhelmingly expensive incense. We stepped out of the elevator. My shoes now sank into thick, plush carpeting. The hands on my arms yanked me to a sudden halt, pushing me down into a heavy leather chair. "Take it off," a voice commanded. It was a low, gravelly baritone that sent an involuntary shiver straight down my spine. The accent was faint, maybe Italian, but smoothed out by years of refined education. It wasn't the voice of a street thug, it was the voice of a king. The blindfold was ripped from my face. I blinked rapidly, the sudden influx of warm, golden light blinding me for a few seconds. As my vision cleared, I realized I wasn't in a torture dungeon or a dirty basement. I was sitting in the middle of a massive, opulent office. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a breathtaking, panoramic view of the glittering city skyline. The walls were lined with thousands of leather-bound books, and a massive mahogany desk sat in the center of the room. And sitting behind that desk was him, Dante Rossi, the head of the Rossi Syndicate, the man who owned half the city's politicians and the entirety of its underground. I had only seen blurry surveillance photos of him on the news, but they did not do him justice. He was 32, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was jet black, swept back flawlessly, and his jawline looked sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that froze the blood in my veins. They were a piercing, striking silver gray. Cold, calculating. They locked onto me like a predator assessing a wounded deer. "Julian Hayes," Dante said, testing the syllables of my name on his tongue as if deciding how they tasted. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his long, ring-adorned fingers together. 23 years old. Graphic design major. No criminal record. No significant assets. And yet, you are standing in my office, carrying a debt of $2.5 million. "I didn't sign those papers," I rasped, my voice hoarse from fear, though I tried desperately to keep it steady. "My brother forged my signature. He sold me out. I don't have your money." "I am acutely aware of your brother's cowardice," Dante replied, his voice remaining terrifyingly calm. He didn't raise his tone, but the sheer authority in his words pressed down on me like a physical weight. "My men are already hunting him. He will be found, and he will be dealt with. But the contract remains. Blood is bound by blood, Julian. The debt falls to you. So what?" I spat, a sudden, reckless surge of adrenaline overriding my terror. If I was going to die, I wasn't going to go out begging. "You brought me all the way up here to shoot me in a fancy office? Go ahead. Put a bullet in my head. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. I'm useless to you." The two massive guards standing on either side of my chair shifted aggressively, one of them raising a hand to strike me for my insolence. But Dante raised a single finger, and the guard froze instantly, stepping back. Dante stood up slowly. He was incredibly tall, towering over the desk as he walked around it. Every movement he made was deliberate, graceful, and deadly. He stopped right in front of my chair. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. The scent of his cologne, cedarwood and black pepper, was intoxicating and terrifying up close. "If I wanted you dead, Julian, you would have never made it into my vehicle," Dante murmured, leaning down slightly. His silver eyes bored into mine, searching for something. "A bullet is cheap. A life, however, a life can be very useful. I don't waste resources." "I'm not a resource," I gritted out, glaring back at him. My heart was hammering against my ribs so violently I was sure he could hear it. "I don't know anything about your world. I can't launder money, I don't know how to shoot, and I'm not going to be a drug mule." Dante's lips twitched. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. It was a look of dangerous amusement. "You are fiery. I was told you were just a scared, quiet student. But there is a spark of defiance in you. I like that. It means you won't break too easily." He reached out, and before I could flinch away, his large, warm hand gripped my jaw. His thumb brushed roughly over my cheekbone. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. I hated how my breath hitched. I hated the sudden flush of heat in my face. He noticed it immediately, his eyes darkening a fraction. "You belong to me now," Dante stated, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. "Your life, your time, your every breath is the property of the Rossi Syndicate until that debt is cleared. You will be my personal errand boy. You will fetch my coffee, you will sort my documents, you will stand when I enter a room, and you will speak only when spoken to. You are my shadow." I jerked my face away from his grip, glaring at him. "And if I refuse? What if I try to run? Then I will break your legs and drag you back here." Dante answered without a second of hesitation, his tone so casual he could have been discussing the weather. "And then I will find everyone you have ever cared about and ensure they pay for your disobedience. But you are a smart boy, Julian. I can see it in your eyes. You won't run. You value your life, even if you pretend you don't." He turned away from me, walking back toward his desk. "Cut his ties." One of the guards pulled a combat knife and sliced through the thick plastic zip ties binding my wrists. I gasped, pulling my arms forward and rubbing the raw, red welts on my skin. The blood rushed back into my hands with a painful, tingling sensation. "Take him to the residence." Dante ordered the guards without looking at me, pulling a file from his desk. "Show him the rules of the estate." "Which quarters, boss?" one of the guards asked gruffly. "The basement holding cells or the staff wing?" Dante paused. He slowly lifted his head, his silver eyes locking onto mine across the room. A strange, unreadable tension sparked in the air between us. It felt heavy, almost suffocating. My breath caught in my throat as he stared at me, his gaze trailing down my disheveled clothes, lingering on the defiant set of my jaw, and finally returning to my eyes. "Neither," Dante said softly, but the command echoed loudly in the silent room. "Put him in my bedroom." The guard visibly hesitated, clearly shocked. "Sir? Your personal quarters." Did I stutter? Dante's voice went dangerously cold, a lethal edge cutting through the room. "He stays in my suite. I want him where I can see him at all times. If he steps 1 foot outside that door without my explicit permission, I will hold you personally responsible. Am I understood?" "Yes, boss." "Understood." Panic flared hot and bright in my chest. A basement cell I could handle. The staff wing I could survive. But his bedroom? The master suite of a Mafia Don? That wasn't a prison. That was a cage, and I was being thrown directly into the lion's den. "Wait, you can't just lock me in your room." I protested, my voice cracking slightly as the guards hauled me to my feet. "What the hell do you want from me?" Dante didn't answer. He simply sat back down at his desk, picking up a gold-plated pen. He didn't even look up as the guards dragged me backward toward the heavy oak doors. "Enjoy your new home, Julian." Dante's voice floated across the room just before the doors slammed shut. "I will be up shortly." I was shoved out into the hallway, my mind reeling. The guards marched me down a series of labyrinthine corridors. The estate was massive, a fortress of marble, bulletproof glass, and armed security. Every corner we passed had a camera. Every doorway had a man in a tailored suit carrying a concealed weapon. Escape wasn't just difficult, it was statistically impossible. We finally reached a set of massive double black oak doors at the end of a private, isolated wing. One of the guards swiped a keycard, and the heavy doors clicked open. They shoved me roughly inside and pulled the doors shut behind me. I heard the definitive, heavy thud of an electronic deadbolt locking into place. I spun around and pounded my fists against the wood. "Hey, let me out of here." You can't do this. Silence answered me. I was completely trapped. I slowly turned around to take in my surroundings. Calling it a bedroom was an insult. It was a penthouse suite. The space was enormous, featuring dark hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows covered by heavy velvet drapes, and a massive, king-sized bed dominating the center of the room. The sheets were silk, midnight black, matching the modern, minimalist aesthetic of the room. There was a private lounge area with leather couches, an enormous flat-screen TV, and a door that clearly led to a massive master bathroom. It was luxurious. It was beautiful. It was a gilded cage. I walked over to the windows, hoping to find a fire escape or a balcony. But as I pulled the heavy velvet drapes aside, my heart sank. The glass was thick, definitely bulletproof, and sealed shut. Furthermore, the suite was at least 10 stories high, looking over the sprawling, private grounds of the Rossi estate. High walls, floodlights, and roaming guard dogs patrolled the perimeter. I swallowed hard, the reality of my situation crashing down on me like an avalanche. I was sold. I was owned by Dante Rossi. And now, I was locked inside his most intimate space. I backed away from the window, my breathing turning shallow. Why his bedroom? If I was just an errand boy paying off a debt, why put me here? The way he had looked at me in the office, it wasn't just calculation. There was a predatory hunger in his silver eyes that made my skin prickle. He didn't just want to use me to settle a score. He wanted to break me. He wanted to own me completely. Hours passed. The sun completely set, plunging the room into shadows, illuminated only by the ambient glow of the city lights outside. I refused to turn on the lamps. I refused to sit on his bed. I paced the floor like a trapped animal, trying to formulate a plan. I needed a weapon. I needed a way out. I walked into the bathroom, opening drawers, searching for scissors, a razor blade, anything. But it was meticulously clean. The only items were expensive colognes and basic toiletries. Suddenly, the heavy electronic deadbolt on the main door clicked loudly. I froze, stepping out of the bathroom and into the main bedroom area. The doors swung open, and Dante Rossi walked in. He had taken off his suit jacket and tie. The top 3 buttons of his crisp white dress shirt were undone, revealing the smooth, olive skin of his chest and the dark ink of a tattoo trailing over his collarbone. He looked tired, running a hand through his perfectly styled black hair. But the moment his silver eyes found me standing in the center of the room, that lethal, predatory focus snapped back into place. He closed the door behind him. The lock engaged with a heavy, final click. We were completely alone. "You haven't slept," Dante observed, his deep voice filling the quiet room. He walked toward a crystal decanter resting on a side table and poured himself a glass of amber liquid. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving my face. "And you look like you are plotting a dozen different ways to kill me with your bare hands." "If I thought it would work, I would," I shot back, forcing myself not to step backward as he slowly approached me. "Brave words for a boy who is trembling," Dante murmured. He stopped just inches away from me. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. I had to look up to meet his eyes. The scent of his cologne and the whiskey on his breath enveloped me. "Are you afraid of me, Julian?" "I don't know you well enough to be afraid," I lied, keeping my chin tilted up defiantly. Dante chuckled, a dark, rich sound that vibrated in his chest. He reached out, his hands slowly coming up to rest on the back of my neck. His fingers were hot against my skin, his thumb brushing a slow, deliberate circle over my pulse point. I gasped at the sudden contact, my body freezing. I wanted to pull away, but his grip was firm, holding me in place with effortless strength. "You will learn to know me," Dante whispered, leaning down so his lips were mere inches from my ear. His breath ghosted across my skin, sending a violent shiver down my spine. "You will learn every rule I set, and you will obey every single one. Because from this moment forward, Julian, your world starts and ends in this room. With me." He pulled back slightly, his silver eyes dark and swirling with an intense, terrifying heat. He wasn't looking at me like a debtor. He was looking at me like I was exactly what he had been waiting for his entire life. "Now," Dante said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a raw, demanding command that made my knees feel weak. "Take off your clothes. It is time for bed." End of Part 1. Part 2, Shadows and Silk. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. "Take off your clothes." My breath hitched in my throat. The sheer audacity, the cold command in his voice sent a shockwave of panic and fury straight to my chest. I took a sudden step backward, my spine hitting the heavy oak door behind me. There was nowhere to go. Dante Rossi stood just a few feet away, a towering figure of relaxed lethality, watching my reaction with those piercing silver eyes. "I'd rather jump out of that window," I spat, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. I don't care what kind of contract my piece of shit brother signed. I'm not a prostitute, and I'm not sleeping with you. For a long, agonizing moment, Dante just stared at me. The silence in the massive suite was deafening. I braced myself, expecting him to strike me, expecting the guards to be called in to hold me down. I was completely at his mercy, a mouse cornered by a lion. And then Dante laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but a dark, rich sound of genuine amusement that vibrated through the quiet room. He shook his head slowly, reaching up to unbutton the cuffs of his white dress shirt. "Your arrogance is almost as entertaining as your temper, Julian," Dante murmured, his accent wrapping around my name like velvet. He turned away from me, walking toward a massive walk-in closet seamlessly built into the far wall. "While your spirit is commendable, you are flattering yourself. I do not force myself on terrified, unwashed boys who look like they are about to hyperventilate. I like my partners willing, and trust me, when I decide I want you in my bed, you will be the one asking for it." The absolute confidence in his statement made my face burn hot with a mixture of indignation and an annoying, terrifying flutter in my stomach. Dante emerged from the closet a moment later and tossed something across the room. I caught it instinctively against my chest. It was a pair of dark gray silk sleep pants and a matching shirt. The fabric was unimaginably soft, softer than anything I had ever touched in my life. "There is an en-suite bathroom through that door," Dante said, pointing without looking at me as he poured himself another glass of whiskey. "Shower, change, and try to scrub the stench of that miserable apartment off your skin. I expect my assets to be well maintained. The leather sofa by the window pulls out into a bed. You will sleep there. If you try the door, the alarm will sound, and my men will not be gentle when they come to reset it. Am I clear?" I clutched the silk clothes to my chest, my knuckles turning white. "Crystal. Good. 30 minutes, Julian. If you aren't out by then, I will come in and retrieve you myself." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted for the bathroom, slamming the heavy frosted glass door behind me and locking it, even though I knew a lock wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to get in. The bathroom was larger than my entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling marble, a massive rainfall shower, and a soaking tub that looked out over the city lights through tinted bulletproof glass. I stripped off my cheap, sweat-stained clothes with trembling hands and stepped into the scalding hot water. I scrubbed my skin until it was red, trying to wash away the fear, the adrenaline, and the lingering phantom sensation of Dante's thumb brushing against my jaw. It didn't work. The memory of his touch was burned into my skin. When I finally stepped out, dried off, and slipped into the silk sleepwear, I felt ridiculous. The clothes fit perfectly, almost suspiciously well, draping over my frame and clinging to my skin. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves, and unlocked the bathroom door. The main bedroom was dim. The overhead lights had been turned off, leaving only the warm glow of the city filtering through the massive windows and a single reading lamp illuminated on Dante's side of the king-sized bed. Dante was already in bed, propped up against a mountain of dark pillows. He wore only a pair of black sleep pants, his chest bare. I immediately averted my eyes, but the image was already seared into my brain. He was built like a Greek statue, muscle and sinew covered in dark, intricate tattoos that crawled up his ribs and over his left shoulder. He held a tablet in one hand, swiping through what looked like financial documents, a pair of sleek reading glasses resting on the bridge of his nose. He looked unfairly attractive, stripping away the terrifying Mafia Don persona and replacing it with something raw, intimate, and infinitely more dangerous. He didn't look up as I awkwardly crossed the room toward the leather sofa near the window. Blankets and a pillow had already been tossed onto it. "The lights on your side are voice-activated," Dante said casually, turning a page on his tablet. "Tell them to turn off when you are ready." I didn't reply. I crawled onto the sofa, pulling the heavy cashmere blanket over my shoulders, and turned my back to him. Lights off. The section of the room around me plunged into darkness. I lay there, staring at the glittering skyline of the city, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was a prisoner. I was sleeping 10 feet away from the most lethal man in the city. The entire situation was surreal, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And yet, as the hours ticked by, the silence in the room wasn't oppressive. It was strangely calm. The only sound was the faint hum of the central air and the occasional quiet rustle of Dante shifting against the silk sheets. I was acutely aware of his presence. It was a heavy magnetic gravity that pulled at my senses. I hated it. I hated that I felt a bizarre, twisted sense of safety locked inside a monster's cage, protected by the very beast that had captured me. Exhaustion eventually dragged me under. Get up. My eyes snapped open. Sunlight was streaming through the massive windows, blindingly bright. I flinched, sitting up quickly, my heart instantly racing. Dante was standing at the foot of the sofa, fully dressed in a sharp, navy blue tailored suit, adjusting a silver watch on his left wrist. He looked fresh, intimidating, and ready for war. "You have 5 minutes to brush your teeth and put your clothes back on," Dante ordered, turning away from me and walking toward his desk to grab his phone and a set of keys. "We have a schedule to keep." "My clothes are dirty," I grumbled, my voice thick with sleep as I rubbed my eyes. "They will have to do for now. Move, Julian." 5 minutes later, I was following Dante Rossi out of the master suite and down the sprawling, quiet hallways of the estate. Two massive guards immediately fell into step behind us. Dante didn't speak to them, and they didn't acknowledge me. I was a ghost, a shadow trailing behind a god. We took a private elevator down to an underground garage that looked more like a luxury car dealership. Rows of black SUVs, sleek sports cars, and vintage classics sat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Dante walked straight toward a sleek, heavily armored black Maybach. The driver held the back door open. Dante slid in, and when I hesitated, he shot me a look that could freeze water. I quickly scrambled in after him, the heavy door slamming shut behind me. The interior of the Maybach was like a private jet. Dark leather, tinted windows that completely blocked out the outside world, and an airtight silence that made the cabin feel incredibly intimate. I pressed myself against the far door, putting as much space between me and Dante as possible. "Where are we going?" I asked, watching as the privacy partition between us and the driver smoothly glided up, sealing us off. "You are my errand boy," Dante replied smoothly, opening a hidden compartment and pulling out a thick, leather-bound folder. "Which means you accompany me to my meetings. You hold my things. You observe. You remain silent. And you do not speak unless spoken to. So I'm your shiny new pet." Dante paused, slowly looking up from his folder. His silver eyes locked onto mine, a dangerous spark igniting within them. "Do not push your luck this morning, Julian. I am in a foul mood, and my patience is not a limitless resource. You will sit there, you will learn how my world operates, and you will be grateful that I did not hand you over to my debt collectors, who would have stripped you for parts and sold your organs on the black market to recoup your brother's losses." I swallowed hard, the sharp reminder of my reality shutting me up instantly. I turned my head to look out the heavily tinted window as the Maybach glided smoothly onto the city streets. Our first stop was a high-end, exclusive tailoring shop in the heart of the financial district. The shop was closed to the public, the front doors locked, but the moment Dante stepped out of the car, the owner, an older, nervous-looking Italian man, rushed to unlock it, bowing his head in deep respect. "Don Rossi in honor, as always," the tailor stammered, his eyes darting briefly to me before snapping back to Dante. "Johnny," Dante greeted smoothly, his voice commanding the room effortlessly. "I need my suits pressed for the gala this weekend." And Dante turned, his gaze sweeping over my wrinkled, cheap clothing with a look of mild distaste. "I need him fitted. Everything. Suits, casual wear, shoes. I want him completely outfitted by tomorrow." My head snapped up. "What? I don't need." "You represent me now," Dante cut me off, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. He stepped closer to me, reaching out to adjust the collar of my cheap jacket. His knuckles brushed against my throat, and I felt my pulse skyrocket. "And I do not allow my property to look like trash. Measure him, Johnny. Give him the Rossi cut." For the next 2 hours, I was prodded, measured, and pinned by Johnny and his assistants. Dante sat on a plush velvet sofa sipping espresso, his silver eyes tracking my every movement. It was unnerving. Every time I looked up, his gaze was fixed on me, heavy and possessive. He wasn't just looking at me. He was studying me, memorizing the lines of my body, the way I stood, the way I breathed. It made my skin flush, a strange, pooling heat settling low in my stomach that I furiously tried to ignore. When the fitting was finally over, we climbed back into the Maybach. "Next stop," Dante told the driver through the intercom. The next stop wasn't a tailor. It was a massive, abandoned warehouse near the docks. The contrast from the luxury of the city center to the grimy, desolate industrial zone was jarring. My stomach tied itself into anxious knots as the Maybach pulled into the shadowy interior of the warehouse. A dozen armed men in dark suits were waiting inside, standing in a loose circle around a kneeling, badly beaten man. The air in the car shifted. Dante's relaxed demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying aura of absolute violence. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like the devil himself. "Stay in the car," Dante ordered me quietly, slipping his hand inside his jacket, the distinct shape of a holstered weapon visible against the fabric. "What is happening?" I whispered, my eyes wide as I stared through the tinted glass at the bleeding man on the concrete. "Business." Dante stepped out of the car. The men in the warehouse immediately straightened up, an atmosphere of absolute terror radiating from them as Dante approached. I couldn't hear what was being said through the thick, bulletproof glass of the Maybach, but I didn't need to. I watched the kneeling man sob, pleading with his hands clasped together. I watched Dante stand over him, a statue of merciless authority. And then, Dante nodded once. One of the men stepped forward, raising a heavy steel pipe. I squeezed my eyes shut, turning my face away and pressing my hands over my ears. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know the reality of the monster I was sleeping in the same room with. The muffled sound of a wet thud echoed through the glass, followed by a scream that made my blood run cold. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I was trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by murderers, owned by their king. The car door opened a few minutes later, bringing a gust of cold, metallic-smelling air into the cabin. Dante slid smoothly back into his seat, adjusting his cuffs. He wasn't breathing heavily. There wasn't a drop of blood on him. He looked completely, terrifyingly unaffected. "Drive," Dante commanded. I pressed myself so hard against the door handle, I thought it might break. I couldn't look at him. I was shaking, a cold sweat breaking out across the back of my neck. "Look at me, Julian," Dante said, his voice soft, almost gentle, cutting through the silence of the cabin. I shook my head, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor mats. I said, "Look at me." The gentleness was gone, replaced by a firm, unyielding command. I slowly turned my head, my breathing shallow. His silver eyes searched my pale face. He reached across the wide seat, his large hand coming up to cup my cheek. I flinched, expecting pain, expecting the violence I had just witnessed to spill over onto me. But his touch was remarkably gentle, his thumb smoothing over my cheekbone. "You are shaking," he murmured, his eyes darkening. "You're a monster," I choked out, the words tumbling past my lips before my brain could stop them. "You're a sociopath." Dante didn't pull his hand away. He leaned closer, the scent of his cologne enveloping me, chasing away the metallic smell of the docks. "I am what I have to be to survive in this city, Julian. That man stole $500,000 from my shipments. In my world, weakness is a death sentence. If I do not punish theft, I lose respect. If I lose respect, my enemies will tear my empire apart, and everyone I protect will die." He leaned in closer, until our faces were mere inches apart. I could feel the heat radiating off his chest. The space in the back of the Maybach felt microscopic. "But you are not my enemy," Dante whispered, his voice dropping to a low, seductive rumble that sent a confusing thrill straight down my spine, fighting against the terror. "You are mine. And as long as you obey my rules, as long as you belong to me, no one in this city will ever lay a finger on you. You are under my protection. The violence you saw today will never touch you. Do you understand?" I couldn't speak. I was mesmerized by the intensity in his eyes, by the terrifying promise in his words. He was offering me absolute safety in exchange for absolute submission. "Do you understand, Julian?" he repeated, his thumb lightly dragging across my lower lip, causing my mouth to part on a shaky breath. "Yes." I breathed, the word barely audible. A slow, dangerous smile curved Dante's lips. The tension in the car was so thick it was suffocating. I felt the overwhelming urge to lean forward, to close the tiny gap between us, driven by an insane, adrenaline-fueled attraction that made absolutely no logical sense. He was lethal. He was everything I should run from. But trapped in the back of that car, feeling the heat of his skin and the undeniable power radiating from him, I realized with terrifying clarity that I was already standing on the edge of the cliff. And Dante Rossi was fully prepared to pull me over. End of Part 2. Part 3. Into the Lion's Bed. The Maybach slowed to a smooth halt, the tires crunching softly against a pristine gravel driveway. We had been driving for nearly 45 minutes, climbing higher into the hills overlooking the city. The oppressive silence in the cabin, born from Dante's explosive display of dominance, had settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. My jaw still tingled where his large hand had gripped it. My pulse was still a chaotic, frantic rhythm drumming in my ears. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring blankly at the partition separating us from the driver. "We are here," Dante announced quietly. The lethal edge had vanished entirely from his voice, replaced once again by the smooth, polished tone of a billionaire aristocrat. It was terrifying how quickly he could switch between the monster and the gentleman. Before I could brace myself, the door on Dante's side was pulled open by a valet. The cool night air rushed into the cabin, carrying the faint scent of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and roasted pine. Dante stepped out first, buttoning his pitch-black suit jacket with a single fluid motion. He didn't look back to see if I was following. He expected it. I took a deep, shaky breath, smoothing my hands down the front of the midnight blue silk suit that felt entirely too expensive for my skin. I slid across the leather seat and stepped out into the night. The estate before us was less of a house and more of a palace. It was a sprawling masterpiece of Gothic architecture, bathed in warm, golden floodlights. Luxury vehicles, Ferraris, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, were lined up along the circular drive. Men in flawless tuxedos and women in glittering, floor-length gowns drifted up the grand marble staircase toward the massive open doors. It looked like a scene from a movie, a gathering of the untouchable elite. Julian. I jumped slightly, snapping my attention to Dante. He was standing a few feet away, his silver eyes completely unreadable as he watched my overwhelmed reaction. He didn't say another word, but he lifted his right arm slightly, bending it at the elbow. He was offering me his arm. My mouth went dry. To take his arm was to publicly accept my position. It was a physical tether, a brand for every single person in that building to see. But I remembered the violent grip in the car, the promise of severe consequences if I embarrassed him. Swallowing my pride and the heavy lump of terror in my throat, I closed the distance between us and carefully slid my hand around the crook of his arm. His muscles felt like carved granite beneath the fine wool of his suit. The moment my fingers touched him, his other hand came up, resting over mine. It was a possessive, trapping gesture disguised as polite intimacy. His thumb slowly stroked the back of my knuckles. "Keep your head up," Dante murmured, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You have nothing to be afraid of tonight, so long as you remember who you belong to. Walk with me." We ascended the marble steps. The moment we crossed the threshold into the grand ballroom, the atmospheric pressure of the entire room seemed to shift. The space was magnificent, featuring vaulted ceilings painted with Renaissance frescoes and massive crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, fractured light over the hundreds of guests. A string quartet played softly in a corner balcony, but I barely noticed the architecture, because the second Dante Rossi walked into the room, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Eyes darted toward us. The political elite, the mayor, the judges, the wealthy CEOs, offered him respectful, almost fearful nods. But the other men, the ones who wore their power like a concealed weapon, the ones whose eyes held the same cold calculation as Dante's, looked at us differently. They weren't just looking at Dante. They were looking at me. I felt completely exposed. Their eyes dragged over the custom cut of my suit, analyzing my youth, my unfamiliar face, and most importantly, the fact that my hand was firmly tucked into the arm of the most ruthless syndicate boss in the country. The whispers started instantly, rippling through the crowd like a virus. Dante didn't seem to care. In fact, he looked like he was reveling in it. His posture was perfectly relaxed, his expression an impenetrable mask of mild amusement. He guided me through the crowd, parting the sea of billionaires and mobsters effortlessly. "Don Rossi, an absolute pleasure to see you gracefully attending this evening." A man stepped into our path, blocking our way. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with slicked-back gray hair and a sharp, hawkish nose. He wore a velvet burgundy dinner jacket and carried a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He smiled, but it didn't reach his dark, predatory eyes. Two massive men who looked exactly like the thugs from the warehouse flanked him. "Lorenzo," Dante greeted, his voice dripping with false, icy warmth. "I see you managed to secure an invitation this year. The mayor must be lowering his standards for campaign donations." Lorenzo chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "We all do what we must for the good of the city, Dante. Though, I must admit, I am surprised to see you here. And even more surprised by your companion." Lorenzo's dark eyes slid from Dante to me. His gaze was entirely different from Dante's. Where Dante's look was possessive and intense, Lorenzo's was slimy, dissecting me with a slow, degrading drag of his eyes. I instinctively tensed, pressing myself just a fraction of an inch closer to Dante's side. Dante felt the movement. His hand, which had been resting over mine, slid down, his large palm settling firmly against the small of my back. The heat of his touch burned straight through the silk of my shirt. It was an unmistakable, deeply territorial claim. "Julian is my personal guest," Dante said, his voice dropping a terrifying half-octave. The polite veneer was slipping, revealing the monster underneath. "Julian," Lorenzo repeated, tasting my name in a way that made my skin crawl. A lovely name. I wasn't aware the Rossi syndicate had started dealing in exotic imports. "Tell me, boy, Where did Dante find someone so remarkably delicate? He didn't find me. I snapped before I could stop myself, my defiance flaring up at the degrading tone. I'm. Dante's fingers dug sharply into my lower back, a silent, painful warning. I snapped my mouth shut, my heart hammering. He is an acquisition. Dante finished for me, his silver eyes locking onto Lorenzo with the intensity of a sniper scope. A very expensive, very private acquisition. One that is strictly off-limits to everyone in this room. Lorenzo raised his hands in mock surrender, a sleazy smirk playing on his lips. Of course, Dante. I meant no disrespect. Though you know my tastes. If you ever tire of him, or if he proves to be too much of a nuisance to train, my doors are always open for a trade. I would happily double whatever debt he owes you. The string quartet kept playing. The crystal chandeliers kept sparkling. But the air between the three of us suddenly turned to ice. Dante didn't shout. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't even drop his polite smile. But the sheer, suffocating aura of lethal intent that exploded from him was so intense it made my breath hitch. He took a single, slow step closer to Lorenzo, bringing me with him. "Lorenzo," Dante whispered, his voice so soft it was almost a caress, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "If you ever look at him again for longer than it takes to blink, if you ever speak his name again, if you even breathe in his general direction, I will not simply kill you. I will dismantle your entire operation piece by piece. I will burn your shipping lanes to ash. I will slaughter your lieutenants in their beds, and I will personally rip your tongue from your throat and feed it to my dogs. Do we have an absolute, crystalline understanding?" Lorenzo's sleazy smirk vanished instantly. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale shade of gray. Even his two massive bodyguards shifted nervously, taking a subtle half-step backward. Lorenzo swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Crystal clear, Don Rossi," Lorenzo croaked out, his bravado entirely shattered. "My apologies." "Enjoy the champagne," Dante replied smoothly, stepping around the older man and guiding me further into the ballroom as if he hadn't just promised a massacre over a passing comment. My legs felt like jelly. I was trembling so hard I was surprised Dante couldn't feel the vibrations through my suit. I had known Dante was a criminal. I had known he was dangerous. But watching him psychologically obliterate a rival boss with nothing but a whisper and a smile was a terrifying revelation. He was a god in this underworld, an untouchable force of nature. And he had just threatened to start a gang war over me. "You're shaking," Dante murmured, steering us away from the crowded dance floor and toward a set of grand French doors that led out to a sweeping stone balcony. "You just threatened to kill him," I whispered frantically, my eyes darting around the room to see if anyone had overheard. "I threatened to do much worse than kill him," Dante corrected calmly as he pushed the glass doors open. The balcony was empty, bathed in the silver light of the moon and overlooking a sprawling, perfectly manicured hedge maze. The cool night air hit my flushed face, offering a brief moment of relief. Dante released my back, walking over to the stone balustrade and leaning against it, looking out over the dark gardens. He pulled a silver cigarette case from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Why did you do that?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and an overwhelming, confusing surge of adrenaline. I stepped closer to him, closing the distance. "Why would you say that to him? You don't care about me. I'm just a debt. I'm collateral. You bought me a few hours ago, and now you're acting like I'm your. My what, Julian?" Dante asked softly. He struck a silver lighter, the brief flare of the flame illuminating the sharp, ruthless angles of his face. He lit the cigarette, taking a slow draw before exhaling a plume of pale smoke into the night air. He turned his head, his silver eyes pinning me to the spot. "Say it. Like I belong to you." I breathed out, the words feeling heavy and dangerous on my tongue. "You do belong to me," Dante stated, pushing off the stone railing and walking slowly toward me. "Your brother signed the papers. The ink is dry. In the eyes of my world, your life, your breath, your future is my property." I backed up instinctively, but my shoulder blades hit the heavy stone wall of the estate. I was trapped between the wall and Dante Rossi. He stopped just inches away from me. The smell of tobacco, cedarwood, and sheer male dominance surrounded me, scrambling my thoughts. "But that doesn't explain why you're doing this," I argued desperately, staring up into his eyes. "You could have locked me in a basement. You could have made me scrub floors. Why the silk suits? Why your bedroom? Why threaten a rival boss over a nobody graphic design student?" Dante reached up, his long fingers carefully brushing a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. The gentleness of the touch was agonizingly contrary to the violence of his reputation. "Because you are not a nobody to me," Dante murmured, his eyes dropping to my lips. I have wealth that cannot be spent in 10 lifetimes. I have men who would die for a single nod of my head. I have power that politicians beg for. But in all my years sitting on this throne, in all the blood I have spilled to keep it, I have never been captivated. My breath hitched. My heart was slamming against my ribs so violently it physically hurt. Captivated, I whispered. I saw the security footage of your brother's apartment when my men kicked down the door. Dante continued, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, gravelly rumble. He stepped even closer, his chest brushing against mine. I saw you. A terrified kid with no money, no hope, backed into a corner. And instead of begging, instead of crying, you grabbed a kitchen knife and told 2 of my best killers to go to hell. A hot flush crept up my neck. I remembered that moment. Pure panic had driven me to grab the knife, even though I knew I couldn't use it. In that moment, Julian, I didn't see a debt, Dante whispered, his hand sliding down to cup the side of my neck, his thumb resting heavily over my frantically beating pulse. I saw a spark, a beautiful, defiant fire that I instantly wanted to consume. I didn't bring you to my bedroom to punish you. I brought you there because I want to tame you. I want to break away every layer of that defiance until you look at me and beg me to own you. A whimper caught in my throat. I couldn't look away from him. The magnetic pull of his presence was overwhelming. My body was reacting to him in ways that betrayed my mind. I hated him for what he was, for what he represented, for holding my life hostage. But God, the way he looked at me made me feel like the center of the universe. It was an intoxicating, lethal poison, and I was drinking it straight from the bottle. I will never beg you, I managed to say, my voice breathy and weak, entirely lacking the conviction I desperately needed. A slow, wicked smile spread across Dante's face. It was the smile of a predator who had already won the game. He leaned in, his lips brushing softly against the shell of my ear, sending a violent shock of electricity straight down my spine and pooling heavily between my thighs. We will see, little bird, Dante whispered against my skin. We have a very long, very private night ahead of us. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes one last time. The raw, unfiltered lust burning in his silver irises made my knees weak. He didn't kiss me. He didn't cross the final line. Instead, he simply adjusted the lapel of my midnight blue suit, his knuckles dragging deliberately over my rapidly rising chest. Fix your face, Dante commanded softly, the Mafia dawn returning in a flash. It is time to go home. The drive back to the estate was a blur. My mind was spinning, short-circuiting from the sensory overload of the gala, the terrifying confrontation with Lorenzo, and the earth-shattering confession on the balcony. Dante sat beside me in the Maybach, sipping whiskey and reading emails on his phone as if he hadn't just tilted my entire world on its axis. When we finally returned to the master suite, the heavy oak doors locking us inside once more, the reality of my situation crashed down on me with renewed force. I was alone in a bedroom with a man who had explicitly stated his intention to consume me. Dante walked over to the decanter, pouring himself a fresh glass of whiskey. He loosened his silk tie, pulling it from his collar and tossing it onto the leather armchair. He unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of his shirt, exposing the dark ink of his tattoos. Every movement was fluid, casual, and painfully attractive. I stood awkwardly near the door, my hands clutching the fabric of my suit jacket. You may use the bathroom first, Dante said, not looking at me as he took a sip of his drink. Take off the suit. Hang it properly. The silk sleepwear is folded on the vanity. I didn't argue. I practically ran into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I stripped off the expensive suit, my hands shaking so badly I could barely undo the buttons of the shirt. I splashed freezing cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the marble-lined mirror. My pupils were blown wide, my lips slightly parted. I looked flushed. I looked like a boy who was dangerously close to surrendering. Don't do this, Julian, I whispered to myself, gripping the edges of the sink. He is playing a game. He is manipulating you. You cannot fall for this. I changed into the dark gray silk pants and the matching shirt. The fabric felt cool against my feverish skin. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I unlocked the door and stepped back out into the bedroom. The main lights were off again, leaving only the soft glow of the city through the massive windows. Dante was already in bed, propped up against the pillows, reading a leather-bound book. He was shirtless again, the shadows playing across the heavily corded muscles of his chest and abdomen. I kept my eyes glued to the floor, walking quickly toward the leather sofa by the window. I pulled the heavy cashmere blanket back, ready to crawl into my makeshift bed and hide from his piercing gaze. Julian. His voice was soft, but it stopped me dead in my tracks. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the cashmere blanket. Yes, I answered, my voice barely a whisper. Leave the sofa. I slowly turned my head, my heart skipping a beat. Dante had lowered his book. His silver eyes were locked onto me, burning with that same intense, unyielding possession I had seen on the balcony. What? I asked, confusion and a spike of panic lacing my voice. Dante reached out, his large hand patting the empty, expansive space on the midnight black silk sheets right beside him. I said, leave the sofa, Dante repeated, his voice dropping into a dark, commanding octave that left absolutely no room for negotiation. You belong to me. And tonight, you are sleeping in my bed. End of part 3. Part 4. Sleeping with the Devil. The command hung in the dim, heavy air of the master suite. Leave the sofa. You are sleeping in my bed. My feet felt like they had been cemented to the floorboards. The cashmere blanket slipped from my numb fingers, pooling in a soft heap at my feet. I stared at Dante Rossi, my mind completely short-circuiting. The distance between the leather sofa and the massive, king-sized bed suddenly felt like crossing a minefield. You're joking, I breathed out, my voice cracking humiliatingly. Dante didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He slowly closed the leather-bound book he was reading, setting it on the nightstand with a definitive, solid thud. He turned his body slightly toward me, the dark ink of the tattoos wrapping around his muscular torso, shifting in the low light. Do I look like a man who tells jokes, Julian? Dante's voice was a low, gravelly vibration that sent a violent shiver down my spine. Come here. I can't, I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I took a step backward, my calves hitting the edge of the sofa. I'm fine right here. The sofa is fine. I don't need to. I am not asking for your preference, Dante interrupted, his tone chillingly calm. He wasn't yelling, but the sheer, overwhelming authority in his voice pressed down on me, crushing the air out of my lungs. I am giving you an order. You are a debt that belongs to the Rossi Syndicate, and tonight, I want you where I can feel you. Now you can walk over here willingly, or I can get out of this bed, pick you up, and put you there myself. The choice is yours. But I promise you, Julian, if I have to stand up, you will not like how the rest of this night goes. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I looked at the dark, calculating intensity in his silver eyes. He meant every single word. If I forced him to come get me, I would lose whatever microscopic sliver of control I still had over the situation. Taking a deep, trembling breath, I forced my legs to move. Each step across the dark hardwood floor felt like I was walking to the gallows. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the ambient hum of the city outside. I reached the edge of the bed and stopped, my hands curled into tight fists at my sides. Dante reached out, pulling the heavy, midnight black silk duvet back, exposing the empty expanse of the mattress beside him. Get in. I crawled onto the mattress, my movements stiff and robotic. The silk sheets were incredibly soft, but they felt like ice against my feverish skin. I lay down on the far edge of the mattress, my back turned completely to him, hovering precariously close to the edge. If I moved an inch, I would fall off onto the floor. I pulled the duvet up to my chin, squeezing my eyes shut, praying for a sudden power outage, an earthquake, anything to end this agonizing tension. The bedside lamp clicked off, plunging the room into absolute darkness. For a long time, the only sound was my own frantic, shallow breathing. I was rigid, every muscle in my body coiled tight, waiting for a hand to grab me, waiting for the monster to strike. But Dante didn't move. He didn't reach for me. I could hear his deep, rhythmic breathing behind me. He was completely relaxed. You are going to fall off the bed, Julian. Dante's voice floated through the darkness, low and smooth. I'm fine, I squeaked, gripping the edge of the mattress. I heard the rustle of silk. The mattress shifted, dipping slightly as Dante moved. Before I could react, a heavy, incredibly warm arm draped over my waist. I gasped, my entire body going rigid as Dante effortlessly pulled me backward. I slid across the slick sheets until my back collided flush against his solid, bare chest. Dante! I panicked, trying to scramble forward. Stop fighting me, he murmured, his voice a dark rumble right against the shell of my ear. His arm tightened around my waist, an iron band that locked me securely against him. He wasn't hurting me, but the sheer physical strength holding me in place was terrifying. I am not going to touch you tonight. You are exhausted, and you are trembling like a stray dog in the rain. I just want to sleep. Now close your eyes and breathe. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his hot breath ghosting over my pulse point. I was paralyzed. I was lying in the dark, entirely enveloped by the man who had bought my life, the man who had threatened to butcher a rival boss just a few hours ago. I could smell the faint, intoxicating scent of his cedarwood cologne mixed with his natural, masculine heat. I could feel the hard planes of his chest pressing against my spine. I could feel the slow, steady, powerful thud of his heartbeat right against my back. It was the most terrifying, confusing moment of my life. My brain screamed at me to fight, to run, to bite and claw my way out of his grip. But my body was betraying me. The warmth radiating from him was seeping into my freezing bones. The heavy, protective weight of his arm around my waist felt incredibly grounding. For the first time since my brother had abandoned me, since the door of my apartment had been kicked in, I felt anchored. Against every instinct of self-preservation, my muscles slowly began to uncoil. My breathing slowed, matching the deep, hypnotic rhythm of Dante's chest rising and falling behind me. The adrenaline crash hit me like a freight train. Wrapped in the arms of a killer, enveloped in the dark silk of his bed, I closed my eyes and plummeted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Light filtered through my eyelids, warm and golden. I groaned softly, burying my face deeper into the pillow. It smelled incredibly good, like rain, expensive soap, and something uniquely dark and masculine. I shifted, my leg tangling with something heavy and warm. My eyes snapped open. The events of the previous night came rushing back like a flood of icy water. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I was still in Dante's bed, but I had rolled over during the night. I was no longer facing the edge of the mattress. I was facing him. Dante Rossi was still asleep, less than a foot away from me. I held my breath, terrified that any sudden movement would wake him. I had never seen him like this. The lethal, untouchable Mafia Don was completely relaxed. His dark hair was messy, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, softer. The sharp, ruthless lines of his jaw were relaxed. The terrifying silver eyes were hidden behind thick, dark lashes. He looked human. He looked breathtakingly, heartbreakingly handsome. Without thinking, my hand twitched. I felt an insane, suicidal urge to reach out and brush the hair away from his eyes, just to see if he felt as soft as he looked. My fingers moved an inch across the pillow. If you are going to stare at me, Julian, at least have the courage to touch me. I violently flinched, snatching my hand back to my chest. Dante's eyes were open. They weren't sleepy or unfocused. They were sharp, clear, and pinning me to the mattress with a heavy, smoldering heat. He had been awake the entire time, just waiting for me to make a move. I wasn't staring. I lied, my face burning with a fiery blush. I scrambled backward, putting as much distance between us as the bed would allow, dragging the duvet up to my chin like a shield. Dante smirked, a slow, wicked curve of his lips that made my stomach do a terrifying flip. He stretched his arms over his head, the muscles in his chest and abdomen flexing beautifully under the morning light. Your face is the color of a ripe tomato, little bird. You are a terrible liar. He threw the covers off and stood up. He was wearing nothing but the dark gray sleep pants that hung low on his hips. I immediately averted my eyes, staring intensely at a spot on the wall. I have business to attend to at the docks today, Dante said, his voice returning to that crisp, authoritative tone as he walked toward the master bathroom. The fallout from Lorenzo's little display last night needs to be managed before his lieutenants get any bright ideas. You will remain here. In the bedroom? I asked, frustration leaking into my voice. You're going to lock me in here all day again? Dante paused at the bathroom door, looking back over his shoulder. No, you have earned a slight extension of your leash. You may explore the East Wing. The library, the indoor gardens, and the private dining room are at your disposal. But you are not to cross into the West Wing, and you are not to attempt to access the ground floor exits. My men have your face memorized. If you try to run, they will tackle you to the marble floor, and I will be very displeased when I return. He stepped into the bathroom, leaving the door cracked open. Eat something. Read a book. Try not to plot my assassination while I am gone. An hour later, Dante left the suite, dressed in another flawless, intimidating suit, leaving me alone in the sprawling silence of the Rossi estate. I dressed in a simple pair of dark jeans and a soft black sweater from the closet he had provided, ignoring the expensive suits for now. When I approached the heavy oak doors of the bedroom, I hesitated. I pressed the handle down. It clicked, opening smoothly. He had actually unlocked it. I stepped out into the hallway, feeling like a ghost haunting a palace. The East Wing was stunning, vaulted ceilings, classical artwork, and rich mahogany wainscoting. It was silent, save for the faint echo of my own footsteps. I wandered aimlessly until I found a set of massive double doors left slightly ajar. I pushed them open and gasped. It was a library, but not just a room with books. It was a two-story, circular rotunda filled from floor to ceiling with thousands of volumes. Wrought iron spiral staircases led to a wraparound balcony. Rich leather armchairs sat in the center of the room, bathed in natural light from a massive glass skylight. It was a sanctuary. Impressive, isn't it? I spun around, my heart leaping. A man was standing near a section of historical texts. He wasn't Dante. He was slightly shorter, with broad shoulders, a shaved head, and a jagged scar running down the left side of his jaw. He wore a tailored suit, but unlike Dante's elegant grace, this man radiated the raw, blunt force of a seasoned brawler. I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was in here, I stammered, taking a step back toward the door. Relax, kid. The boss told me to keep an eye on you from a distance, the man said, sliding a thick book back onto the shelf. He walked toward me, offering a rough, calloused hand. I'm Marco, Dante's underboss. You met the rest of the crew at the warehouse yesterday, but I was handling a shipment. I hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was like a vice, but he didn't try to intimidate me. Julian, I replied quietly. Marco chuckled, leaning against one of the heavy oak tables. Oh, I know who you are. The whole syndicate knows who you are. You're the $2.5 million boy who Dante threatened to start a gang war over last night. Rumor travels fast in our world. My stomach tied itself into a knot. It wasn't. I didn't ask him to do that. He reacted. Marco's dark eyes studied me intently. Dante Rossi doesn't just react, kid. Every move he makes is calculated. Every word he speaks is intentional. I've been with him for 12 years. I watched him take over this syndicate when his father was murdered. I watched him wipe out 3 rival families before his 25th birthday. He is the coldest, most ruthless bastard I have ever had the pleasure of serving. Marco paused, crossing his arms over his chest. But I have never, not once in 12 years, seen him bring a collateral debt up to the East Wing. I've never seen him let anyone sleep in his bed. And I have certainly never seen him look at a kid in a cheap suit the way he looked at you on the security cameras. My breath hitched. He was watching me on the cameras? He watches everything, Marco corrected smoothly. Listen to me, Julian. I don't know what it is about you that flipped a switch in his head, but you need to understand the danger you are in. Not from the other families. From him. Dante is a black hole. He consumes everything he touches. If you play games with him, if you try to manipulate that twisted obsession he has with you, he will destroy you. I don't want to manipulate him. I shot back, frustration bubbling up. I want to pay off my brother's debt and go back to my life. I don't want any part of this mafia obsession. Marco looked at me with a mixture of pity and amusement. He shook his head slowly. Your old life is dead, Julian. The moment Dante saw you, that life ceased to exist. You can fight it, and you'll be miserable, or you can accept that you belong to the king now and try to find a way to survive the throne room. Marco pushed off the table, walking past me toward the exit. Enjoy the books. Try not to run. I'd hate to be the one who has to break your legs. He left me alone in the massive library, my mind reeling. Marco's words echoed in my head, a terrifying confirmation of what I had suspected. Dante wasn't just using me to settle a score. He was obsessed. I was trapped in the crosshairs of a predator who didn't know how to lose. I spent the rest of the day hiding in the library, pulling books off the shelves, trying to distract myself. I found several volumes on philosophy, military strategy, and history. What shocked me the most was that many of them had handwritten notes in the margins. Elegant, aggressive handwriting. Dante's handwriting. He was reading Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, and ancient Roman history, dissecting their strategies, arguing with the authors in the margins. He wasn't a mindless thug. He was a brilliant, terrifyingly educated tactician. By the time the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the library floor, the sky outside darkened ominously. A heavy summer thunderstorm rolled in over the city, lightning flashing through the skylight, followed by the deep, bone-rattling rumble of thunder. I returned to the master suite just as the rain began to lash against the bulletproof windows. The room was dark. I reached for the light switch, but before my fingers could graze the panel, the heavy oak doors swung open violently behind me. I spun around. Dante stood in the doorway. He looked entirely different from the man who had left this morning. His suit jacket was gone. His white dress shirt was completely soaked through with rain, clinging to the heavy muscles of his chest. His tie was ripped loose. But it was his face that made my heart stop. He was furious. A raw, unhinged rage radiated from him in waves so intense it made the air in the room feel physically heavy. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle ticked violently near his ear. And as a flash of lightning illuminated the room, I saw it. His knuckles were split open, dripping fresh, dark crimson blood onto the hardwood floor. "Dante," I whispered, my voice trembling, instinctively taking a step backward. He stepped into the room, kicking the heavy doors shut behind him with a slam that made me jump. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his silver eyes fixed on me with a terrifying, wild intensity. He looked like a wolf that had just torn out the throat of a rival. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the crack of thunder outside. "Lorenzo," Dante spat, the words sounding like poison in his mouth. He walked toward the center of the room, his bloody hands resting on his hips. He thought my threat last night was a bluff. He sent a crew to hit one of my warehouses at the docks. He thought he could test my borders. My eyes darted to his bleeding knuckles. Did they hurt you?" Dante let out a dark, breathless laugh, wiping rain from his face, smearing a streak of blood across his own cheek. "No, but Lorenzo is currently learning how to breathe through a tube, and his lieutenants are floating in the harbor. I told him what would happen if he challenged me. He was a murderer. He had just killed people. My brain screamed the facts at me, begging my legs to run, to hide in the bathroom, to lock the door. This man was a monster covered in the blood of his enemies. But as I looked at him, standing in the middle of the dark room, soaking wet, bleeding, and vibrating with adrenaline, I didn't see just a monster. I saw a king fighting to keep his crown. And for a completely irrational, insane reason, my fear was suddenly overshadowed by something else. I walked toward the en-suite bathroom. I grabbed a thick, white towel and a small first aid kit from the cabinet. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to walk back into the bedroom, stopping right in front of him. Dante looked down at me, his chest still heaving. His silver eyes were wild, searching my face for the terror he clearly expected to find. "Sit down," I said softly, my voice miraculously steady. Dante blinked, clearly caught off guard by the gentle command. "What?" "Sit down on the edge of the bed," I repeated, gesturing to the mattress. "You're bleeding all over the floor." For a moment, I thought he was going to snap at me, to remind me of my place. But slowly, the tension in his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. He walked over to the edge of the bed and sat down, the mattress dipping under his weight. I stepped between his spread knees. The proximity was overwhelming. The heat radiating off his wet body, the smell of rain, copper, and adrenaline was intoxicating. I gently took his right hand in mine. His hand was massive compared to mine, his knuckles bruised, split, and coated in drying blood. I used the damp towel to carefully wipe the blood away. Dante didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his eyes boring into the top of my head as I worked. The silence between us was heavier than the thunderstorm raging outside. I applied antiseptic to a cotton pad and pressed it against his cuts. "Why are you doing this?" Dante's voice was a low, rough whisper. I paused, looking up from his hands to meet his eyes. We were so close I could see the tiny flecks of storm gray in his silver irises. "Because you're hurt." "I am a killer, Julian," Dante murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. "I just slaughtered 6 men. I came in here covered in their blood. You should be cowering in the corner. You should be terrified of me." "I am terrified of you," I admitted honestly, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I slowly reached up, using a clean corner of the towel to wipe the streak of blood off his cheek. My fingers brushed against the sharp line of his jaw. "But I don't want you to be hurt." Dante's breath hitched. It was a microscopic sound, but in the quiet space between us, it was deafening. The wild rage in his eyes completely shattered, replaced by an inferno of raw, desperate hunger. Before I could pull my hand away, Dante's hands shot out. He gripped my waist, his massive fingers digging into the soft wool of my sweater, and hauled me forward. I gasped as I lost my balance, crashing into his chest, my knees knocking against the edge of the bed. He pulled me seamlessly onto his lap, his arms wrapping around me like steel bands, trapping me flush against his soaking wet body. "Dante," I breathed, my hands flying up to rest on his broad shoulders. "You are dangerous for me, Julian," Dante growled, his voice a ragged, desperate vibration against my chest. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his hot mouth pressing frantically against my pulse point. "Do you have any idea what you are doing to me? Do you know what it does to my mind to have you look at me like that?" I couldn't speak. I was completely overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing intensity of his touch. My fingers curled into the wet fabric of his shirt, clinging to him as the thunderstorm raged outside, perfectly mirroring the chaotic, terrifying, and undeniably electric storm breaking between us. End of Part 4. Part 5. The Storm Inside. The thunderstorm raging outside the bulletproof windows was nothing compared to the violent, chaotic storm breaking inside the master suite. I was trapped on Dante Rossi's lap, my knees bracketing his hips, my hands curled desperately into the soaking wet fabric of his ruined white shirt. His massive arms were locked around my waist like iron bands, anchoring me to him with a possessive, crushing strength. His face was buried in the crook of my neck. I could feel the erratic, desperate heat of his breath scorching my skin. I could feel the hard, rapid thud of his heart hammering against my own chest. He was trembling, not from the cold of the rain, but from a raw, unhinged adrenaline that was entirely focused on me. "Dante," I breathed, the words slipping past my lips as a ragged whisper. My fingers instinctively slid from his shoulders up into his damp, dark hair. I shouldn't be touching him. I shouldn't be comforting the man who had bought my life, the man who had just returned from slaughtering his enemies. But logic had completely abandoned me. All I knew was the overwhelming, magnetic pull of his body against mine. He groaned, a dark, primal sound that vibrated straight through my core. His lips brushed against the sensitive skin just below my ear, sending a violent shockwave of electricity down my spine. I arched into him helplessly, a soft, humiliating whimper catching in my throat. That sound, that tiny, broken sound of surrender, seemed to snap whatever frayed thread of control Dante was holding onto. His hands moved from my waist, his large fingers gripping my hips with bruising intensity. He lifted his head, his silver eyes completely dilated, entirely consumed by a dark, feral hunger. Water dripped from his dark hair onto his sharp cheekbones, mixing with the faint trace of blood I had missed with the towel. He looked dangerous. He looked like a god of war who had finally found the one thing he wanted to claim for himself. "Julian," Dante growled, his voice a lethal, intoxicating rumble. "Tell me to stop. Tell me to push you away and lock myself in that bathroom. Because if you don't, if you keep looking at me like that, I am going to devour you, and I will never, ever let you go." My breath hitched. My mind screamed at me to run, to save myself from the abyss. "He is a monster," a small voice in my head pleaded. "He is the Mafia. He owns you." But as I looked down into those stormy, desperate silver eyes, the voice faded into nothingness. I didn't want to run. I was already falling, and the only thing I wanted was for him to catch me. "Don't stop," I whispered, the confession tearing out of my chest, raw and terrifyingly honest. Dante's pupils blew wide. With a sudden, explosive surge of movement, he stood up, taking me with him. I gasped, wrapping my legs instinctively around his waist as he carried me the short distance toward the pillows. He fell backward onto the massive king-sized bed, taking me down with him, so I was straddling his chest. His hands tangled in my hair, pulling my face down to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a violent, desperate collision. His mouth crashed against mine, hot and demanding, tasting of rain, expensive whiskey, and the sharp tang of copper. I gasped against his lips, and he immediately took advantage, his tongue sweeping into my mouth, claiming every inch of me with a ruthless, consuming passion. It was like drowning in a tidal wave. All the fear, the anger, the paralyzing tension that had been building between us for days finally ignited in a massive, uncontrollable explosion. My hands scrambled over his broad chest, pulling at the wet fabric of his shirt. I needed it off. I needed to feel the heat of his skin against mine. Dante realized what I was doing, and with a rough, impatient groan, he gripped the hem of his ruined shirt and ripped it over his head, tossing it onto the floor. He was a masterpiece of lethal muscle and dark ink. I traced the jagged lines of the tattoos covering his chest, my fingertips burning everywhere we connected. He flipped our positions in a fraction of a second, pinning me to the mattress beneath him. His heavy, muscular frame trapped me completely, his knees on either side of my hips. He kissed my jaw, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin of my neck, making me writhe beneath him. "Mine," he muttered fiercely against my collarbone. "You are completely mine. I am going to ruin you for anyone else." "Dante, please." I gasped, my fingers digging into the heavy muscles of his back, urging him closer. I was burning from the inside out, completely consumed by the overwhelming dominance of the man above me. His hand slid down my waist, his long fingers slipping under the hem of my sweater, tracing the bare skin of my stomach. My breath caught in my throat as his touch trailed higher, igniting a trail of fire across my ribs. He leaned down, capturing my lips again, his kiss slower this time, deeper, pulling a desperate moan from my chest. But suddenly he froze. His entire body went completely rigid above me. The kiss broke abruptly. Dante tore his mouth away, his chest heaving as he stared down at me. His silver eyes were wild, battling an internal war that I couldn't understand. "Dante," I whispered, my chest rising and falling rapidly. "What's wrong?" He squeezed his eyes shut, a muscle ticking violently in his jaw. He pulled his hand out from under my sweater, his fists clenching so tightly his knuckles turned white. With a heavy, agonizing groan, he pushed himself off of me, rolling to the side of the bed and sitting up, putting his back to me. The sudden loss of his body heat was like being plunged into a freezer. I sat up quickly, pulling my sweater down, my heart pounding with confusion and a sharp, sudden sting of rejection. Did I do something wrong? I asked, my voice trembling. No, Dante rasped, his voice sounding like it was being dragged over broken glass. He ran a shaking hand through his damp hair, gripping the strands tightly. No, Julian. You are perfect. You are exactly what I want. But, he took a deep, shuddering breath. Not like this. I stared at his broad, tattooed back, completely bewildered. I don't understand. You just said. I said I want to consume you, Dante interrupted, turning his head slightly to look at me over his shoulder. The hunger was still there, burning brightly in his eyes, but it was chained down by a terrifying amount of iron willpower. And I do. Christ, Julian, I am losing my mind over you. But you are running on pure adrenaline. You just cleaned my blood off my hands. You are terrified, you are overwhelmed, and your body is reacting to the trauma of the storm and the violence. He stood up, walking a few paces away from the bed, putting distance between us as if he didn't trust himself to be within arm's reach of me. If I take you tonight, Dante continued, his voice lowering to a steady, commanding timbre, you will wake up tomorrow morning and hate yourself for surrendering to the man who holds your debt. You will think it was Stockholm Syndrome. You will think I forced your hand by scaring you into submission, and I refuse to have that. I sat on the edge of the bed, my legs dangling, my mind spinning. He was a mafia boss. He took whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. And yet, here he was, standing half-naked in the dark, explicitly denying himself the one thing he clearly desired because he wanted my consent to be absolutely, perfectly clear. I don't hate you, I whispered into the quiet room. Dante turned to face me fully. He looked exhausted, the weight of his empire and the blood on his hands finally showing in the lines around his eyes. You should, Dante murmured softly. But the fact that you don't is exactly why I have to stop. When you come to my bed, Julian, it will not be because you are scared or because you are seeking comfort after a storm. It will be because you have accepted your place by my side in the daylight. It will be because you want me just as ruthlessly as I want you. He walked over to the mahogany dresser, pulling out a fresh, dry shirt and sliding it over his broad shoulders. He didn't look back at me as he walked toward the door. Go to sleep, Julian, Dante commanded quietly, his hand resting on the brass door handle. I have to deal with the mess Lorenzo made at the docks. I will be in my study for the rest of the night. Lock the door behind me. He stepped out into the hallway, pulling the heavy oak door shut. The electronic lock didn't engage. He had left it unlocked, giving me the choice to lock him out. I sat alone in the massive, dimly lit bedroom, my lips still tingling from his kiss, my skin still burning from his touch. I walked over to the door and slowly turned the deadbolt, locking myself safely inside the cage. But as I slid back into the silk sheets that smelled overwhelmingly like him, I realized the terrifying truth. The lock on the door wasn't keeping the monster out. It was keeping me in. And worse, I no longer wanted to leave. The next 2 days were an agonizing blur of tension and isolation. Dante was barely around. The fallout from the hit on Lorenzo's warehouse had spiraled into an all-out syndicate war. The Rossi estate was locked down tight. Security was tripled. I watched from the bulletproof windows of the master suite as dozens of black SUVs continuously rolled into the compound, unloading heavily armed men who patrolled the perimeter with assault rifles. When Dante did return to the suite, usually in the dead of night, he was a silent, terrifying phantom. He would shower, strip down to his sleep pants, and crawl into the far side of the bed. He didn't touch me. He barely spoke to me. But I could feel the crushing weight of his exhaustion and the simmering, dark energy of a man fighting a war on 2 fronts, one in the streets of the city and one in his own bed. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the heavy silence of the estate shattered. I was sitting in the library, trying to focus on a book about Roman history, when Marco burst through the double doors. He didn't have his usual calm, intimidating swagger. He looked tense, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. Julian, get up, Marco barked, crossing the room in 3 massive strides. What's wrong? I asked, my heart instantly leaping into my throat. I dropped the book on the table and stood up. Lorenzo's allies, Marco growled, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the hidden service corridors of the library. They formed a coalition. 3 rival families. They know Dante is distracted. They know he brought a civilian into the inner sanctum. They think he's gone soft, that he's compromised his judgment for a pretty face. They're making a move on the estate. Panic exploded in my chest. Here, they're attacking the house. They're already past the outer gates, Marco said grimly, pushing me down a narrow, dimly lit hallway that I had never seen before. Dante has the perimeter locked down, but it's a bloodbath out there. His strict orders were to get you to the panic room beneath the east wing before the breach the main doors. Where is he? I demanded, planting my feet and refusing to move further. Where is Dante? He's at the front gates leading the defense, Marco snapped, his patience wearing thin. Kid, do not test me right now. If they get inside and find you, they won't just kill you. They will torture you on camera and send the tape to Dante to break him. You are his only weakness, and every shark in this city smells blood in the water. Move. A deafening explosion rocked the foundation of the estate. The antique chandeliers above us violently swayed, crystal shattering and raining down onto the marble floors. The power instantly cut out, plunging the hallway into pitch blackness before the red, flashing emergency lights kicked on, bathing the walls in an eerie, blood-red glow. Gunfire erupted. It wasn't the distant pop of a handgun. It was the terrifying, rapid-fire roar of automatic weapons echoing through the grand halls of the mansion. They breached the west wing, Marco cursed, pulling a heavy Glock from his shoulder holster. He shoved me behind him. Stay low. Do not make a sound. We crept down the narrow corridor. My lungs were burning, my breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. The reality of Dante's world was crashing down on my head. This wasn't a movie. Men were dying just a few rooms away, and the entire war was happening because Dante had refused to hide me, because he had claimed me publicly at that gala. We reached a heavy steel door at the end of the hall. Marco rapidly punched a code into the keypad. The light blinked green, and the heavy pneumatic seals hissed, unlocking the door. Get inside, Marco ordered, keeping his gun trained down the dark hallway behind us. There's food, water, and an independent comms system. Do not open this door for anyone except me or Dante. If the comms go dead and we don't come back in 12 hours, there's a cyanide pill in the medical kit on the wall. Take it. It's better than what they'll do to you. The sheer horror of his words paralyzed me. Marco, wait. Get in. Marco roared, shoving me hard into the dark room. He slammed the heavy steel door shut. The locks engaged with a series of loud, terrifying clunks. I was completely sealed inside a concrete bunker beneath the earth, while the man I was falling in love with fought a war for his life above me. I paced the small, fortified room for what felt like hours. The walls were thick concrete, but I could still feel the faint vibrations of explosions above ground. My imagination ran wild, painting horrific pictures of Dante bleeding out on his marble floors, his beautiful silver eyes going glass-like and dead. I couldn't lose him. The thought struck me with a violent, undeniable clarity. I had spent the last week fighting him, hating my captivity, resenting the debt. But the truth was Dante Rossi had carved a space for himself inside my soul, and if he died, he was going to take a piece of me with him. Suddenly, the heavy steel door shuddered. I froze, backing away until my shoulders hit the concrete wall. Someone was at the keypad. The light above the handle flashed red. Incorrect code. My heart stopped. It wasn't Marco. It wasn't Dante. The rival families had found the bunker. The keypad beeped again. Red. I looked frantically around the small room. Marco's words echoed in my head. There's a cyanide pill in the medical kit. My eyes darted to the white box mounted on the far wall. Was this it? Was this how my life ended? Trapped in a Mafia bunker, dying in the dark? The keypad beeped a third time. Green. The heavy pneumatic seals hissed. The steel door was thrown open with violent force. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the gunfire. Julian. My eyes snapped open. Standing in the doorway, framed by the red emergency lights of the hallway, was Dante. He looked like a nightmare walking. His bespoke suit was shredded. He was covered in plaster dust, soot, and an alarming amount of blood. His silver eyes were wild, scanning the small room until they locked onto me. The sheer, overwhelming relief that washed over his face was staggering. He dropped his assault rifle onto the floor. It hit the concrete with a loud clatter. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I pushed off the wall and ran at him. Dante caught me, his massive arms wrapping around me, lifting me completely off the ground. He buried his face in my neck, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders, clinging to him like he was the only solid thing left in a crumbling universe. You're alive, I sobbed, my tears mixing with the blood and dirt on his cheek. Oh my God, you're alive. I told you I protect what is mine, Dante rasped, his voice shaking with an emotion he couldn't hide. He set my feet on the floor, pulling his head back just enough to look at my face. His hands frantically roamed over my arms, my chest, checking for injuries. "Did they touch you? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. I'm okay," I choked out, grabbing his face with both my hands. "You're bleeding." "It's not my blood," Dante said fiercely, his silver eyes locking onto mine. The adrenaline, the violence, the near-death experience of the last hour completely stripped away the calculated, controlled Mafia Don. All that was left was the raw, primal man who had almost lost his obsession. "Julian," Dante breathed, staring down at my lips. There was no hesitation this time. No stepping back. No honorable restraint. I pulled his face down, and our lips crashed together. It was a desperate, punishing kiss, fueled by the sheer terror of almost losing each other. Dante groaned, a deep, possessive sound, backing me up until I hit the cold concrete wall of the bunker. His hands tangled in my hair, tilting my head to deepen the kiss, his tongue claiming my mouth with a ruthless, demanding heat. I kissed him back with everything I had. I didn't care about the debt. I didn't care about the syndicate, or Lorenzo, or the fact that we were standing in a bunker surrounded by death. The velvet cage had shattered, and I was completely, willingly throwing myself into the arms of the beast. End of Part 5. Part 6. The King and His Shadow. The cold concrete wall of the bunker bit into my spine, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything except the crushing, desperate heat of Dante Rossi pressing against me. The world outside this steel door was burning. Bodies were littering the marble floors of the estate, and yet the only thing that mattered was the frantic, possessive slide of his lips against mine. His hands were everywhere, frantic and heavy, mapping the curves of my waist, tangling in my hair, gripping my jaw as if he was terrified I might disappear into smoke. The metallic taste of adrenaline and blood mixed with the intoxicating scent of his cedarwood cologne. I kissed him back with a ferocity that surprised even me. My fingers dug into the ruined, soot-stained fabric of his suit, pulling him impossibly closer. I didn't care about the syndicate war. I didn't care about the danger. I had thought he was dead. The agonizing, suffocating terror of losing him had completely shattered the last remaining wall of my resistance. "Mine," Dante growled against my mouth, his chest heaving as he finally tore his lips away, resting his forehead against mine. His silver eyes were entirely black, dilated with a raw, primal obsession. "Tell me, Julian. Say it." "I'm yours," I gasped, my chest rising and falling rapidly. I reached up, my thumbs wiping away a streak of dirt and blood from his sharp cheekbone. "I'm yours, Dante. Only yours." A ragged, shuddering breath escaped his lips. The terrifying Mafia Don, the man who had just orchestrated the slaughter of a rival coalition, closed his eyes and leaned into my touch like a starving man offered a feast. He pressed a hard, lingering kiss to the palm of my hand. "We need to move," Dante murmured, his voice thick with a dark, simmering restraint. He opened his eyes, the lethal clarity returning to his gaze. "The estate is secure, but my men are sweeping for survivors. I will not have you in this bunker a second longer than necessary. Come." He didn't offer his arm this time. He intertwined his large, calloused fingers with mine, his grip tight and unyielding. With his free hand, he scooped up his discarded assault rifle from the floor. We stepped out of the bunker and into the dimly lit service corridor. The red emergency lights bathed the hallway in an eerie, blood-like glow. As we ascended the hidden stairwell and emerged into the main corridors of the West Wing, the true scale of the violence hit me. The estate was unrecognizable. The vaulted ceilings were scarred by bullet holes. The priceless Renaissance paintings were shredded. The thick mahogany doors were splintered off their hinges, and the air was thick with the acrid, choking smell of cordite and smoke. Dozens of Dante's men were moving with military precision, securing the perimeter, stepping over the bodies of the rival soldiers who had dared to breach the Rossi stronghold. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on Dante's hand. I expected to feel the same paralyzing terror I had felt at the docks. But as I looked at the destruction, a strange, dark realization washed over me. All of this, the war, the blood, the shattered glass, had happened because Dante had refused to give me up. Lorenzo and his allies had tried to leverage me, and Dante had chosen to burn the city to the ground rather than let them touch a single hair on my head. Don Rossi. Marco stepped out of the shadows of the grand foyer. He was limping heavily, a makeshift bandage wrapped tightly around his left thigh, completely soaked in dark blood. He looked exhausted, his suit torn to shreds, but his dark eyes were sharp and alert. "Status, Marco," Dante demanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority through the ruined hall. "The perimeter is locked down. The local police have been bought off and told to ignore the noise. Lorenzo's coalition is broken, Marco reported, wincing slightly as he shifted his weight. Then, his dark eyes slid past Dante and landed on me. He saw our intertwined hands. A faint, knowing smirk tugged at the corner of his scarred mouth. The East Wing is completely untouched, boss. I had my best men secure the doors to your suite before the breach. Good. Get yourself to Dr. Evans in the medical wing, Dante ordered, his tone softening just a fraction for his loyal underboss. And Marco, excellent work tonight. Just doing my job, Dante, Marco nodded. He looked at me one last time, offering a slow, respectful dip of his chin, an acknowledgement that I was no longer just collateral. I was the Don's partner. Have a good night, Julian. Dante led me away from the carnage, navigating through the massive double doors that separated the ruined West Wing from the pristine, untouched East Wing. The contrast was jarring. Here, the crystal chandeliers still gleamed, the thick carpets were spotless, and the silence was heavy and peaceful. We reached the heavy oak doors of the master suite. Dante pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner. The deadbolt clicked open. We stepped inside, and the heavy doors sealed shut behind us, locking the chaos of the underworld outside. The room was exactly as I had left it. The dark silk sheets on the king-sized bed, the warm ambient light of the city bleeding through the bulletproof windows. But everything between us had fundamentally changed. Dante dropped the assault rifle onto the floor. He let go of my hand, walking slowly toward the center of the room. He looked physically drained, the adrenaline finally crashing. He shrugged off his ruined suit jacket, throwing it onto the leather sofa. His white shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing a dark, nasty graze where a bullet had narrowly missed his flesh. "You're hurt," I said, my voice barely above a whisper in the quiet room. I walked toward him, my eyes fixed on the bloody tear in his shirt. "It is nothing. A graze," Dante replied, turning his back to me as he walked toward a heavy, steel-reinforced safe hidden behind a massive oil painting on the far wall. He punched in a code, the heavy steel door swinging open. "It's not nothing, Dante. Sit down," I commanded, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. I wasn't the terrified hostage anymore. I was the man who had just kissed the devil in a bunker and survived. Dante paused, looking over his shoulder at me. A faint, exhausted smile touched his lips. He actually obeyed, walking over to the edge of the bed and sitting down, much like he had during the thunderstorm. I went to the bathroom, retrieved the medical kit, and returned to his side. I carefully unbuttoned his ruined shirt, pulling the fabric off his broad shoulders. His chest was covered in bruises and small cuts from the shrapnel, but the worst of it was the graze on his shoulder. I cleaned the wound in silence, my fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming intimacy of the moment. Dante watched my face intently, his silver eyes tracking every shift of my expression. When I finished bandaging his shoulder, I looked up, only to find him holding a thick, folded document in his uninjured hand. I recognized the heavy, cream-colored paper instantly. It was the contract. The document my brother had forged, the piece of paper that had sold my life to the Rossi Syndicate for $2.5 million. "Dante," I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "What are you doing?" Dante didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his silver lighter. He flipped the lid open with a sharp metallic click. "When I first brought you to this room, I told you that your life belonged to me," Dante said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the quiet space. He looked at the contract, his expression completely unreadable. "I bought you. I owned your debt. I told myself that you were just a tool, an asset, a pretty little bird I could lock in a cage and tame." He looked up, his silver eyes locking onto mine with a vulnerability I had never seen in him before. "But you didn't just survive the cage, Julian. You broke it," Dante murmured, his voice thick with raw emotion. "You looked at a monster covered in blood, and instead of running, you touched his face. You made me feel something I thought had died inside of me a decade ago." He held the contract up. He struck the silver lighter. A bright orange flame flickered to life. Dante touched the flame to the corner of the thick paper. "No, wait," I gasped, my eyes widening as the paper caught fire. "The debt is paid," Dante said firmly, his eyes never leaving mine as the flames crawled up the edge of the document, turning the ink and lies into black ash. "The contract is void. Your brother's sins are washed away. You are not a hostage. You are not an acquisition. You are a free man, Julian." He dropped the burning remnants of the contract into a heavy crystal ashtray on the nightstand, watching as the last of the paper curled and turned to smoke. I stared at the ashes, completely paralyzed. My freedom. The thing I had been desperately praying for since the moment his men kicked down my door. It was right there. He had just burned the chains binding me to him. There is a car waiting in the underground garage, Dante continued, his voice dropping to a harsh, painful whisper. He looked away from me, staring down at his bruised hands. It was the first time he couldn't meet my gaze. It has a bag with $500,000 in cash and a new passport. The driver will take you anywhere in the country you want to go. You can walk out of that door right now, Julian, and I swear on my life, no one in my syndicate will ever look for you. You will never see me again. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the faint hiss of the dying embers in the ashtray. He was letting me go. The most ruthless, possessive man in the city, the man who had just fought a war to keep me, was opening the door to the cage because he loved me too much to keep me as a prisoner. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. A choked, breathless laugh escaped my lips. "You are an absolute idiot," I whispered. Dante's head snapped up, his silver eyes wide with shock. "What?" I didn't hesitate. I stepped directly between his parted knees, reaching out and grabbing the heavy silver chain resting against his bare chest. I pulled him forward, forcing him to look up at me. "You burn the contract, you offer me a car, you tell me I'm free," I said, my voice trembling with fierce, overwhelming emotion. "Do you honestly think I want to leave? Do you think after everything we just survived, after what happened in that bunker, I'm going to walk out that door?" "Julian," Dante breathed, his hands instinctively coming up to grip my waist, his fingers digging into the soft fabric of my sweater. "I am giving you an out. If you stay, you are choosing this life. You are choosing the shadows, the danger, and you are choosing me. I am a selfish, ruthless man, and if you stay tonight, I will never give you this choice again." "I don't want the choice," I replied, my tears finally spilling over, tracking down my cheeks. I let go of his chain and cupped his face, running my thumbs over his sharp cheekbones. "I don't want freedom if it means I have to exist in a world where you aren't looking at me. I don't belong to a contract anymore, Dante. I belong to you, and you belong to me." A ragged, desperate groan tore from Dante's throat. He buried his face in my stomach, his massive arms wrapping around my waist, holding me with a crushing, reverent devotion. It was the ultimate surrender. The king of the underworld, bowing to the boy he had bought. "Julian," he murmured fiercely against my skin. "My beautiful, defiant boy." He pulled me down. I straddled his lap, my knees sinking into the soft mattress on either side of his hips. His hands were instantly in my hair, pulling my face down to his. The kiss was nothing like the frantic, adrenaline-fueled collision in the bunker. It was slow, deep, and devastatingly intimate. It was a promise. He tasted like smoke and expensive whiskey. I opened to him completely, letting his tongue sweep inside my mouth, matching his rhythm, pouring every ounce of the love and desperation I felt into the kiss. My hands traced the heavy, corded muscles of his chest, mapping the dark ink of his tattoos, feeling the rapid, thunderous beating of his heart against my palms. Dante effortlessly shifted our weight, laying back against the dark silk pillows and bringing me down on top of him. He pulled the hem of my sweater up, dragging it over my head and tossing it onto the floor. The cool air of the room hit my bare skin, but it was instantly replaced by the scorching heat of his large, calloused hands mapping the curve of my spine. "You are breathtaking," Dante whispered, his silver eyes burning with a heavy, undisguised lust as he looked up at me. His hands slid down to my waist, tracing the lines of my hips with agonizing slowness. "I have imagined you in my bed, on my sheets, every single night since I brought you here." "Then stop imagining," I breathed, leaning down to press a soft, open-mouthed kiss against the racing pulse at the base of his throat. Dante didn't need to be told twice. He rolled, pinning me to the mattress with effortless, terrifying grace. The physical weight of him above me was intoxicating. This was where I was meant to be. The fear was completely gone, replaced by a searing, white-hot desire that consumed my entirely. He kissed his way down my jaw, his lips grazing the sensitive skin of my neck, drawing a sharp, breathless moan from my lips. His hands were everywhere, exploring, claiming, worshipping. He treated my body like something infinitely precious, yet he consumed me with the raw, possessive hunger of a predator. Every touch, every whisper, every lingering kiss was a brand, a permanent mark claiming me as his equal, his partner, his shadow. We crossed the line we had been dancing around for days, tangling together in the midnight black silk sheets, losing ourselves in a storm of heat, passion, and absolute unconditional surrender. I didn't hold anything back. I gave him everything, and in return, Dante Rossi gave me his entire world. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet drapes, casting a warm, golden glow across the master suite. I woke up slowly, my body heavy, aching in the best possible way, and completely enveloped in warmth. I was lying with my back pressed against Dante's chest. His heavy arm was wrapped securely around my waist, holding me flush against him. His face was buried in the crook of my neck, his deep, rhythmic breathing sending soft shivers down my spine. I smiled, tangling my fingers with his. He stirred instantly, his grip tightening around me. "Morning," I whispered softly. Dante pressed a slow, lingering kiss to my shoulder before burying his face in my hair. I was half convinced I was going to wake up and find the bed empty, that you had taken the car and run. I turned over in his arms, resting my hands on his broad, tattooed chest. I looked up into his silver eyes. They were clear, calm, and filled with a profound, terrifyingly deep affection. "I told you," I murmured, leaning up to brush my lips against his. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Dante smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made him look devastatingly handsome. He brushed a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. "The syndicate will be in chaos today. Marco will need me to finalize the restructuring of Lorenzo's territories. Then you better get up, Don Rossi," I teased gently, tracing the line of his jaw. "You have an empire to run." Dante's eyes darkened slightly, his hand sliding down to grip my hip. "We have an empire to run. You are coming with me, Julian. From now on, you stand by my side. In the light and in the shadows." A thrill of power and absolute belonging washed over me. I wasn't just a boy paying off a debt anymore. I was Julian Rossi in everything but name. The man who tamed the monster. The shadow behind the king. "I wouldn't have it any other way," I whispered. We walked out of the master suite an hour later. Dante was dressed in a flawless, charcoal gray suit, looking every inch the untouchable, lethal mafia boss. But this time, I wasn't walking behind him in a cheap, wrinkled shirt. I was dressed in a custom, midnight blue suit, walking directly beside him, our shoulders brushing. The heavy oak doors opened. Marco and a dozen armed guards were waiting in the hallway. When they saw us step out together, not as a captor and a prisoner, but as equals, Marco offered a deep, respectful bow. The rest of the men immediately followed suit. Dante didn't look at them. He looked at me, a proud, possessive fire burning in his silver eyes. He reached out, lacing his fingers with mine, completely unbothered by the eyes of his men. "Ready?" Dante asked softly. I squeezed his hand, looking down the long, marble hallway toward the future we were about to build together. Lead the way. End of part 6. Thank you so much for listening. It was an incredible journey with Julian and Dante. If you enjoyed this intense, emotional boy love story, please hit the like button, mention your favorite moment in the comments, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any more exciting stories. Until next time, stay safe and keep immersed in BL fantasies.